Welcome to the Operator SDK community meeting. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully my screen is visible. Someone speaking?
Yeah, your screen's good.
Okay, thanks, Rice. I think we can get started. Going on to the first agenda, any new faces, anyone who's attending the meeting for the first time or after a while who would like to introduce themselves. If not, moving on to the next item, which is office hours and community interests. Bryce, thoughts on adding automatic PR merge when a PR has the following criteria? Do you want to explain about it a bit?
Yeah, so the thought here is just that a lot of the way our current PR like merge process is, with it being manual, typically like someone will come in and review and leave an LGTM, and then we'll come around and we'll have another approval, and then we move on. And typically PRs that already have an LGTM and meet all the merging criteria typically sit around for a little bit longer now that we have a little bit fewer active maintainers, since some people have left that have been, maintainers. And so I just think it would be really helpful to stay on top of those PRs and be like a nice community hygiene type thing, to have some automatic PR merging whenever it meets, the typical criteria that we would have whenever we go ahead and, manually merge a PR. So yeah, just curious on thoughts on that, and whether or not, the community.
How did you envision actually making that occur?
Sorry, say that again.
How were you actually going to do this?
Yeah, so I know like KubeBuilder uses Prow and stuff, but there's a bunch of different options that we could discuss. If we decide that we do want to go this route, I can create an issue to kind of have some discussion about this. I think there's ways we can use GitHub Actions. We can use some kind of.
So the reason I asked this is because this is something we had already spoken about at the steering committee meeting, and we're looking into it before, we lost some people, and yeah. Prow would be nice, but Prow is a very heavyweight solution because you need a place to host it and you need to administrate it, and it's kind of very complicated and substantial. We were looking for something a little bit more lightweight, and there is some stuff coming out of the CNCF that is basically like replicating some of that functionality in GitHub Actions. But like we didn't actually try and get any of it working yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I think the operator framework, there's a couple of repos that already have this functionality via Prow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know which repositories and where that Prow lives?
I don't remember.
It's operator lib. And to add to what Jonathan said, I don't know how the steering committee will agree to it, but there's open source OpenShift CI, which has a few bots and the infrastructure that manages it. And we use that for operator lib to automatically merge. So I don't know if we are open to finding options in OpenShift CI to do this, because they already have this set up. And I don't know
if they'll let us use it. My only concern is I'd like operator framework people to have admin access if we need to like reconfigure stuff or fix it, so we don't have to like track down OpenShift people to work on stuff.
So I'm not sure how the setup works, how the infra works, and who controls and what admin access to the sub-project owners have. I think we need to do a bit of digging into how those things work. I am not aware of it on top of my head, but all I know is we do have set up to automatically merge in OpenShift, which operator lib already follows.
Do you know where the
Varsha, are you talking
configuration-
about OpenShift slash releases? Is that what you're talking about?
Probably, I think operator lib is
Yeah,
mentioned
so
in
so
that.
OpenShift slash releases, you can add any project in as a dependent project and set up what CI jobs you want triggered. The caveats to that is you don't have access to those proud clusters at all as like a dependent project. But you can change your jobs configurations and stuff like that.
Where does that configuration live?
It lives in OpenShift slash releases. So
I don't know what that means.
it's a project on GitHub.
In what org?
So it's OpenShift slash releases,
Oh,
right? So so basically you can configure
is that
your
a
jobs
public
there.
repository?
Say that again.
Is that repository public?
Yes. Let me just double check that that's the name. But
Yeah.
the downfall is you don't have access to, you know, like the Prow infrastructure, like that's managed internally. The other downfall too is like load, because you're, you know, you say, hey, what version of OpenShift do you want it to run on or whatever. And then it's basically shared. So sometimes you'll get timeouts, you know, when there's peak load, because there's only like, you know, 10 or 20 clusters per version available. But it is an option for this type of thing.
Are there any restrictions on which project can be a part of it? Like operator framework is essentially supposed to be CNCF, not Red Hat OpenShift related. So it's like any project can use those resources and add themselves to OpenShift releases, or is there some caveat on those things?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the caveats on those are. Like, I know that we have a few projects that are open source projects that are in there that are technically not part of OpenShift itself, but part of more Red Hat certification type workflows and stuff like that. So
I mean, it looks like OLM is using this as well. The operator lifecycle manager repository specifically has some jobs in here.
Yeah, it looks like operator registry also uses the OpenShift merge robot to automatically merge PRs.
Do we know like who owns this? Like who to talk to ask if we could use this? I imagine it's someone at Red Hat.
yeah, there's an internal Slack channel. Let me find it.
Yeah, so it looks like actually, I was looking at the operator registry repo settings, and it looks like there's a GitHub app called OpenShift CI that I think enables that functionality.
Yeah, that has to be added to your project, I believe.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's something that I don't have access to configure, but all the other apps, like I could go in and I can configure. So I don't know if, Jonathan, you're wanting to be able to have admin access to be able to like change things. I don't know if that would allow that. So that might be like a non-starter for that specifically.
So here's my concern. My concern is something breaks and we need to fix it. If it's, you know, oh, go talk to this internal Red Hat person on this internal Red Hat Slack channel, like someone who's not Red Hat, like, you know, me, like I can't even start to do that. So like, I suppose it's not like really a hard requirement that like, oh, we need to have admin access to reconfigure the cluster, but like there needs to be some sort of open way to actually get problems fixed. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I'm curious how Upstream Cube does. Do they do this? I suppose they should be doing this given the volume of PRs they get. I'm
Well,
not
Upstream
sure.
Cube, the Kubernetes project maintains its own PRAO
Yeah.
cluster. So like, it looks like this might be configured the same way or a similar way, where the individual subdirectories PRs can be merged. Because like in operator lib, it sounds like I thought I saw your names. There's like an owner's file that configures who can merge pull requests to that own subdirectory. Yeah, and like Varsha and Everett Raven, you listed here, so you can merge PRs to this directory to change the job configuration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, my name's not on there.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's various options that we can go, and I mean, if it's better to raise this in the steering committee meeting, I don't remember when like the next open one is.
I think it's like in a week. It's March, and then a single digit number.
It's this Wednesday, March 1st. So.
Oh, is it literally? Okay, well, it's
2 days.
real early, real soon.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, we could, but like, I don't know. Speaking as a member of the steering committee, I don't know what you'd get different out of them. Like, they're probably going to say the same thing. Like, oh, that would be cool. How do we set this up? Oh, we need to talk to a Red Hat person.
Well, so I guess my wondering is if it'd be best to talk to the steering committee to say like, hey, let's go ahead and, you know, have somebody, whether that's me or somebody from the steering committee, explore what the possible options are and seeing which one we feel would fit, you know.
I mean, like I said, we were already aware of the other options. We had decided that setting up our own PRAO instance was way too much work, and like we would have to maintain it, so that wasn't really an option. We were looking into stuff with the GitHub Action stuff that some people from the CNCF were working on, but that was not quite ready, and like again, we would have to set it up ourselves. So like if we can get access to this PRAO repository, like that is probably a better fit, because then in order to set stuff up, we just have to like write this job configurations in these subdirectories, and like assuming we can set up the owner's file, then we can merge our own pull requests here.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
I guess just one clarifying thing on that. The owner's file, even if you're an owner on that file, you can't merge into the project. It's all auto merge. So like once someone.
Yeah. But like it counts the people's.
Yeah.
It'll count your LGTMs as actual LGTMs, and then it'll auto merge.
Yeah. I just wanted to.
I don't really stipulate a difference between that.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that the project doesn't have a merge button, basically. Like it's all automatic.
Yeah. For operator SDK, I think we would still have like admins can still force merge stuff if needed, but ideally we don't ever do that and rely on the auto merging functionality. But
I mean, I'm not too worried about taking those permissions away, because that's just like one more thing we have to keep track of.
I'm not worried about this either, but I'm curious on, do we ever need to force merge in case, I don't know how releases happened recently. It's been long since I've done release, but usually for every release I had to force merge because Netlify was failing.
Yeah, the release commit.
Yeah.
So
theoretically, it's not a requirement. It's just that like usually you don't want to go through the trouble of like having a separate person who's not, because otherwise you double the number of people you need to cut a release if you actually want it to be merged.
Yeah, so I think the regular release PR can be merged normally. I think the only thing that we need to make sure we keep is the ability to force push tags for releasing purposes, because that is a step in our release process.
I thought we fixed it so you don't have to force push anymore.
I thought you still had to force push latest to update like our doc site with the latest stuff. But I don't know. That was just the last time I did a release. I thought I recall having to throw on the -F option when I did a git push for a tag. Well, Catherine is actually going to be doing the 128 release, I think, this week. She's out today, but so I can see if I can talk to Catherine and see if she had to force push anything.
Okay.
Just to conclude, Bryce, do you want to get started on this and like just have a doc on the options available on what we could do? Put thoughts into it. Or do you want to wait for the steering committee to discuss? Like as Jonathan said, I don't know what else with steering committee discuss on this.
I mean, I don't know, like Jonathan said, I don't know if there's any more reason to like discuss options since they've already kind of been evaluated. I can create an issue in the operators kit repository to like have a discussion about this and get some more information on how we get the OpenShift CI stuff integrated such that we can have these auto merges and have somewhere to track, like, here's all the information for enabling this, and here's where we can make changes whenever we need to make changes and all that kind of stuff.
It would be nice to have the options also noted down in the issue so that like probably 1 year later, if we come and see, we know that we have discussed about this and that was something which is not possible.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. Anything else we would like to discuss on this or any other community issue we want to talk about? If not, moving on to the issue triage, we have a couple of issues today. Notes on Golang tutorial. I think we discussed about it. One was the validation. We had specified a different number for the validation, and then we are trying to test the other way around, like trying to test the invalid case in the tutorial. The second one was the recorder wasn't scaffolded, and the third one was adding the container port. I think a person already created, one of the authors created a PR for 1 and 3. Jonathan, you had mentioned discussing 2. I just looked into it and replied for it. If you want to add something, please go ahead and then I can explain what I found out.
Oh, sorry. I remember I added this. I don't remember what it was about.
Yeah, I think the first and the third change were pretty straightforward. It was just documentation change. And the second one was just that in the test data, which is scaffolded by operator SDK plugin, we don't initialize the recorder for an API which we create. And in the tutorial, we ask folks to copy paste controller.go. And the controller.go in turn has I think it's in controller section.
Right. And that thing is.
Yeah, the controller.go in turn calls recorder to record event, a deletion event. And then this errors because folks like copy paste this file, recorder is not instantiated in main.go. It errors out, and then that's a big question mark. And this happens because we point towards the test data, which is scaffolded by the deploy image plugin. And then the normal operator SDK init commands don't use those particular plugin. And that's the cause of confusion for this. So I think one option would be to just add it to do section, in my opinion. And the second would be to like use this deploy image plugin, specify all the flags, and then tell the operator SDK to scaffold out the recorder and instantiate the recorder and stuff, which I think is not needed for someone who's just getting started. Does that make sense?
I mean, those two things make sense, but I'm wondering if there's potentially a third option, which is just like get rid of the recorder entirely. Because like,
So this recorder is scaffolded by default. I don't know where, yeah, default when create API is called, because we are using the deploy image plugin. So the
that's
issue
in the
is,
test data.
yeah, exactly. And then we are asking folks to go to the scaffolder.test data, copy controller.go from there, and then paste it in their project, which they are trying it out. We are scaffolding out with a different command than what we are telling users to do in the tutorial. We are scaffolding it out with a plugin just to show folks that this particular project follows the best practice. But then we are telling in the tutorial to use just the operator SDK create API command.
And you think, why do you think it's simpler to tell them, oh, hey, add all this junk, as opposed to just changing the create API command?
So my understanding is tutorial is for someone, not the tutorial, the shorter version of the tutorial. The quick start, yeah, is for someone who wants to get started. And for anyone who has to get started, I would not want them to use a plugin, which is especially in the alpha stage, which is not even stable right now. And then for someone who wants to get started, they would not want to know what image to use in the deployment, what is the container command, and all the other things, even though they are optional, just because it follows the best practice.
But you think, hey, add all this junk, don't worry about what it does, is easier?
So my understanding is that is not junk, that is like a best practice. So if you want to follow
Okay, but we're not
our
gonna
tutorial,
tell them what
I
all
think-
that does in the quick start.
Yeah, so what I'm telling is add a kind of to do or add something out in the sample operator telling this is not added by default and this is something you need to add if you want your operator to follow best practice. Because I don't want to remove this entirely from a memcached operator, just because we have an operator which tells these are the things to do, these are the things which we shouldn't do. The other option is to probably create another sample telling best practice operator or something like that. I don't know if that's another option which we want to explore.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have a bit of a problem with the fact that we're even using this test data that's generated by changes that are made on the master branch that aren't even in an operator SDK release yet to say, hey, and I think we normally point to the latest release for this, but still, we don't typically have a way of saying, hey, this code has definitely not changed from the last time it was used for documentation. So I wonder if we would be better off just creating like a new folder called like docs, or I think we actually might even have a docs folder, but we can put an example operator in there that doesn't change based on generation logic. And we can consistently point to that. That way, whenever changes happen in the test data, it doesn't impact our docs experience. So we would be responsible for manually updating that docs, or we can have some kind of docs specific generation logic. But I think we should be we should be having to manually update that example operator that we're using in our documentation to make sure that we're on the same page as the documentation at all times with that.
We did follow that approach, and the whole point of having this generator was to not manually update the documentation, in the sense of should have some kind of automation that does that. So like instead of manually updating it, I would be fine with the idea of having another folder in test data which just says V3 SDK or V3 best practice, which uses the deploy image plugin, and then just V3 memcached operator that uses the normal operator SDK init commands, and then we reference that in the doc instead of the one with all the modifications of deploy image plugin. Because we have seen cases where manual update is needed, and then folks forget to update the docs manually, and then it remains unmaintained. And that was the whole reason we got in the generator to be plugged in, and then had this test data folder, and then reference test data in the docs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the docs examples being generated, but I think, in my opinion, it needs to be like a dedicated action to generate that docs example, not necessarily like make generate generates it for us. Like we might want to be like make docs generate or something, because I'm concerned that just because we have obviously run into this issue now of where we're just generating new test data that we're pointing in the docs to and saying, hey, this is, line for line, copy this, it will work. And that's no longer the case. And it hasn't been the case consistently, So I'm just concerned that if we just say, here's another test data thing, that down the line, we're eventually going to change that unless we have, some way of distinctly saying this is for docs purposes only. This is the one that's pointed to. We need to ensure that this aligns with the documentation, and not just generate over it every single time.
I think the reason why why the docs and test data is different is because we are kind of using different commands in the tutorial, and then different commands to generate the data. So I'm fine, as Bryce said, to have another folder with memcached operator for docs, but then having it separately as a separate target, for me, it doesn't add any value, because whatever change you do in operator SDK command should reflect in that particular folder. So you can run it every time you run a make generate. It's going to create another folder with whatever change you have in that command. Running it separately for docs and then updating it, for me, I've never encountered an issue where you make a change in operator SDK command and then you don't reflect that in the docs. You usually have to call the command to generate the test data. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine too. I think maybe what I'm thinking is maybe we need to have a separate generation script that is specifically like docs generator.go or something, or docs example generator.go, rather than the one that does all the same test data generation, just to make sure that we don't go and change the way that the example is scaffolded, like the commands and stuff. I'm just trying to think of ways that we can prevent somebody from going in saying, oh, all this other test data is using, this deploy image plugin. And then, somebody who doesn't have the context of this conversation is like, oh yeah, we should do that. Sets it up and merges it. And then all of a sudden we're back in the same place,
Oh, I get it. You mean basically, I can't find the exact. You mean basically in here have a separate memcache sample for the docs, which shouldn't be changed with anything happening in the. Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like anytime we go to update how test data is generated and stuff, that docs one should not be touched unless we actively are changing the commands that are used throughout the documentation.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's how we are supposed to implement anyway, like have a separate method which generates the memcache samples.
Okay.
And go. Yeah. how do we want to proceed this? Do we want to create a separate issue to track that, or do we want to track it here? I would be open to creating a separate issue, but any other ideas you all have?
I'm personally fine with either way. I don't know if Jonathan or Adam, you have particular opinions.
Jonathan, would you be fine if I create a separate issue out of this, and then probably based on whatever the author has created for 1 and 3, we can close this?
Sure.
Good, I can follow that up. And since 1 and 3 are already pre-Rs for 1 and 3 are already created, can I put this into 1.29 to be on the safe side?
Sure.
Thanks, Jonathan. Moving on to the next one. Please update Go RESTful, Golang GWT and golang.org/x/net version to fix twist lock scan issue. Seems to be Ansible operator related. Anyone has inputs on this? It looks like we have a few dependencies that needs to be updated. Do we have to bring this in the Ansible operator community meeting, or any idea on if this is straightforward enough to just update it?
So these are Go dependencies. So I think that they, I don't know if any Ansible people would really be like, I don't think it would impact Ansible specifically for anything other than the fact that it's a Go mod change that needs to be done. And those look like they were indirect dependencies, so
yeah,
I'm not necessarily sure. I would be a little hesitant to just bump them in case we bump to a change or to a version that makes a change that breaks whatever our direct dependencies that are pulling that in are using. So I think we can take a look into this, but depending on what dependencies are pulling it in, if it's like something that'll be fixed when we do a Kubernetes bump, I would probably have this just wait on the Kubernetes bump and reference our meta issue for that. But you can assign me and I can dig into this a little bit.
cool. Thanks, Bryce. Do you want me to push this to 1.29?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks. Moving on to the next one. Run bundle config map is invalid. Too long, must have at most 1 MB. I think Bryce, you had replied.
Yeah, so I think this could be because in run bundle and run bundle upgrade, now what we do is essentially what was happening before is we would take an FBC and we would generate the YAML output for it. And because FBC is generating a stream of content, it's actually considered multiple or multiple YAML files separated by like the 3 dash separator output as like one file. And what I did is a while back, I created this partitioning logic that would separate based on that 3 dash separator and essentially create a new stuff as many of those into one config map as possible. And once it reached, if adding a YAML chunk to an existing config map would cause a problem, we would then create a new partition, which is just a new config map named blah, blah, blah operator dash partition, and then the partition number, and then add it to that and continuously go in that loop. One of the things that I'm wondering with this is there's a couple sections where we say, okay, there's no information in there. We're just going to go ahead and stuff the thing in there. We can add some kind of case to check and see if what we're going to stuff in there is too large by itself and then error out early. But I don't know how much of a change that would be, because my thinking as to what the problem could be here is that they have one YAML definition that's just way too big to fit into a config map anyways, which might be a bundle that has so much information that it doesn't fit within the etcd limits by itself anyways. And I'm not sure that there's even a way that we could break that apart further than, splitting YAML based on that 3- delimiter. Hopefully that makes sense. I mean, I'm definitely interested to do some debugging on this, so you feel free to assign me if nobody else wants to take a stab at this. But
Do you want me to add triage needs more information?
I see what bundle they're using there, so I mean I could debug it, so I don't necessarily need more information. I just don't know. I don't know
Is
if
this
this is going to
a
be.
community bundle?
I don't know. Maybe it is a private thing, but I can try to pull it. And if it's not, I can ping them. I think I have enough information to try figuring this out. But if it becomes a situation where it is what I'm thinking, I don't know if there's really a way that we can actually resolve that, because it's like trying to define something like say you're defining a deployment that's just way too big to fit into etcd limits. Like you can't logically break one deployment YAML definition in half and stuff it, into 2 config maps or whatever. But I don't know.
Do you want me to add this to backlog? Did you figure out if the issue is on their end or on ours?
Yeah, I'd put it on backlog. And maybe for now label it as triage support. I don't know. I'd leave that off. Just we'll do backlog and I'll take a look at it.
Okay, I'll leave the labels to you. Anything else we want to discuss on this issue? Moving on to the next one. Managing different versions of CRD in the operator SDK controller. Oh yeah, so just to give a quick highlight, the issue is the author has two versions of say foo CRD, which is V1 alpha 1 and V2 beta 1. And what they are trying to do is probably they have one version as a storage version, and they are trying to call and get the other version, V2 beta 1. And then the API server is returning the V1 alpha 1 version. So this is kind of a triage support. My understanding is that V1 alpha 1 is the storage version, which is stored in etcd, and that's the reason it's returning all the objects with that GVK. And if they have to use multiple versions in their CR, they would have to use conversion webhook, which is kind of the standard. So in my opinion, this is a triage support. Please shout out if you have anything else, like if you think it's something else. I'm putting this into backlog since there's nothing else which we could do. That's how conversion webhooks work. The next one is persistent volume. Our persistent volume claim Helm chart deployment using Helm operator is facing issue. I'm trying to deploy PV or PVC Helm chart using Helm operator, but it's not creating all the persistent volume mentioned. Does it support or not? I'm expecting to create persistent volume claim with the PV and PVC YAML configuration. my understanding is Helm should support it. There is no reason why it should not support creation of a resource unless there is a particular error which we would uh, which we could see in the logs. So if anyone has any other inputs in this, we can note it down.
I'd maybe ask for more information to be able to replicate this. Like, do they have, are they able to share their operator that we can test with? Stuff like that, just because
Yep.
Something not creating something, I'd feel like is not enough information for me to really find out what the error is, because it could be potentially a Helm chart issue on their end.
Would anyone like to take up this issue? If not, I think we can leave it unassigned and wait for the author to reply. And probably in the next triage, put this to backlog if the author hasn't replied yet.
I think that's fine.
Sorry, Jonathan?
I said, I think that's fine, leaving it unassigned and waiting for the author to reply.
Yep. Thanks. Moving on to the next one. What did you do? I want to have a timeout before next reconcile after creating a new resource. To make it possible, I used controller.result requeue after 10 seconds. My code can be found here. What did you expect to see? I expect the controller to wait for 10 seconds before doing the next reconcile. What did you see instead? So I created a new CR. I see that the controller did not wait at all and led to the problem already exists. So I kind of looked into the issue and I have asked for a few follow-up questions, but the gist of it is reconcile controller.result requeue after delays the time for requeuing the key of your CR into the controller queue. But that does not mean that any other secondary or dependent resources, for example, the own resources, are the secondary resources which are being watched. So any event triggered by them will still get into the queue. It's only for the dependent controller custom resource that requeue after is used. But either ways, the question is requeue after is usually intended for a timed reconciliation where you want to reconcile continuously after, say, a day or after 5 hours, just to be sure that the current state is in the desired state. The current state of the operator is in the desired state. And if there is any change caused by objects which cannot be watched by the controller, it just ensures that reconciliation is happening at the particular interval of time. So I've just asked a few follow-up questions on this. I'm going to put this to Triage support. Do anyone of you have like any thoughts on this? If not, I can assign this to myself and put this to Triage support.
I mean, you answered the question. This is expected, like, this is normal behavior. I don't know what else there is to do for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to make sure in my head, whenever we have a requeue after, right? If no reconciliation happens, like if nobody changes even your owned resources, it should still requeue it after that time, right? Like if no reconciliation kicked off previously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's 10 seconds, it should reconcile after 10 seconds. But the thing is, so for example, the reconciliation is happening and there you are watching a secondary resource, and then secondary resource triggers a reconciliation. So that doesn't mean you're stopping the requeue just because you have a requeue after mentioned to 10 seconds.
Right.
The event will still get into the queue.
Cool.
Yep. I think that's all we have for today on the issue triage. Is there anything else anyone wanted to discuss, or any other action item or PR discussion which we would like to have?
The molecule tests are still broken.
But I fixed them. I thought.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
I remember
was
you
the
had a bunch of
problem?
Ansible PRs, right? Are they these, Bryce?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So fix Ansible CI. And then, because that should have fixed the actual CI failures. And then there was another one for the cryptography thing that I merged, or got merged. But so the CI for Ansible should be fixed. It was working on.
Okay, I'll just rerun the test again.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Bryce. Thanks for fixing that.
No problem.
If there is nothing else, then that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Oh, actually, Jonathan, one thing I did want to say, actually, with the Ansible stuff.
Is the recording over?
Oh, I don't think so, but.
Yeah, let me. Do you want me to stop the recording?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.